What makes a woman kill 7 men and claim it was self-defense every single time? This isn't a horror movie. It's the real-life story of Aileen Wuornos, a woman whose name would go down in history as America's first female serial killer. But behind that label is a life so brutal, so broken, it forces you to stop and ask, was she evil or just a product of everything that failed her? Aileen's childhood wasn't just hard, it was horrifying. Abandoned by her mother, molested by her grandfather, pregnant at 14, living under bridges, surviving through sex work by 13. Society never gave her a chance. And by the time she picked up a gun and started hitchhiking through Florida highways, she didn't trust anyone, especially men. Then the bodies started piling up. 7 men, all shot. Some found in the woods, some still in their cars. And when the cops finally caught her, she didn't deny a thing. She looked them in the eye and said, "Yeah, I killed them. And I'd do it again if I had to." But here's where it gets murky. She said they attacked her first, that she was raped, beaten, or threatened, that every bullet was self-defense, not murder. And suddenly the question changed from how could she to what would you have done if you were her? Imagine this. You're alone, no home, no family, no protection. You hitch a ride and a stranger pulls off the road. You feel that fear rising in your chest. And in your bag, a pistoli. What happens next? If you believe justice is always clean-cut, Aileen Wuornos will shake that belief to its core. Because in her world, there was no clean, only survival. And right before she was executed in 2002, she whispered something so eerie, so unexpected, it left the courtroom frozen. In the next few minutes, we'll break down the facts, the trauma, the murders, and the secret she took to her grave. This isn't just a crime story. It's a look inside a mind forged by violence and a world that never cared enough to stop it. This is the true story of Aileen Wuornos, America's most infamous female serial killer. And after this, you might never look at the word monster the same way again. Aileen Wuornos' story doesn't start with a crime scene. It starts with abandonment. Born in 1956, her father was in prison before she ever met him, and her mother walked out before Aileen turned 4. From the beginning, she was shuffled into instability, raised by grandparents who brought their own struggles. Her childhood wasn't just difficult, it was isolating. She never had a sense of home, of safety, or of being truly wanted. By the time she reached her teens, Aileen was living a life far removed from anything resembling normal. She spent nights outdoors, often on her own, and relied on survival instincts most people never need to develop. At 15, she was on her own completely, navigating a world that had written her off before giving her a chance. She wasn't violent yet. In fact, the most striking part of her early life is how long she tried to survive without turning to crime. Imagine being a teenager, told by society, through silence, neglect, and rejection, that your life doesn't matter. It wasn't one tragic moment that sent her down a dark path. It was 1,000 quiet ones, a slow build-up, a long silence, a growing ache. This isn't the origin story of a villain. It's the story of someone who was unseen. Aileen didn't descend into darkness overnight. She slipped through the cracks, slowly, until she wasn't sure where else to go. Her life wasn't shaped by choices, it was shaped by the absence of them. And so the question begins to form. Was she destined to become dangerous, or simply denied the tools to become anything else? Long before headlines called her a killer, she was a cautionary tale of what happens when someone is left behind by every system meant to help. She hadn't killed anyone yet, but the clock had already started ticking. The real question is when the killings began. Were they an act of revenge, or a desperate move for survival? Between 1989 and 1990, fear spread quietly along Florida's highways. One by one, 7 men turned up dead, shot, stripped, and dumped on remote roads. The killer wasn't leaving a cryptic signature or dramatic scene, just a chilling pattern. Each victim had picked up a woman, and each never made it home. When police finally connected the murders, one name emerged: Aileen Wuornos. Aileen never denied the killings. In fact, when she confessed, she did so with unnerving calm. But her story wasn't what most expected. She claimed every man had tried to assault her after soliciting her for sex, and she only pulled the trigger to survive. 7 men, 7 alleged attacks, 1 woman with a .22 caliber revolver. To Aileen, it wasn't murder. It was self-defense. She told authorities that these weren't random executions. These were fights for her life. She was a woman who lived off the streets, trading sex for survival, always bracing for violence. But eventually, she stopped bracing and started shooting first. Still, the facts complicated her story. Investigators recovered stolen wallets, pawned items, and personal belongings of the victims in her possession. And while some deaths had signs of a struggle, others didn't. There were inconsistencies in her retellings. Some scenes suggested she may have struck first, not reacted in fear. The public was divided. Some saw a woman pushed too far by a brutal life, someone reacting the only way she knew how. Others saw something colder. An opportunist using self-defense as a shield, targeting vulnerable men, taking their things, and vanishing into the night. Was she surviving or hunting? Aileen's version of the events painted herself as both terrified and justified. But media coverage had no such nuance. They branded her America's first female serial killer. The headlines sold her as a monster, not a woman with trauma, but a predator with a gun, victim or villain. The world had already chosen, but there was one piece missing in the early coverage. One person always at her side, until everything fell apart. Her partner, Tyria Moore, had been with Aileen through the entire killing spree. She wasn't just a bystander, she was the one Aileen went home to after each murder. But when the police came calling, Tyria vanished. So now, the mystery deepened. Who was this woman beside Aileen? And why did she turn silent when it mattered most? Of all the people in Aileen Wuornos' chaotic life, Tyria Moore was the one constant. Her girlfriend, her companion, her only real family. In Aileen's world, where abandonment and betrayal were common currency, Tyria was her safe place. But that bond would become the final thread unraveling her entire world. When the murders made headlines and police closed in, it wasn't Aileen who cracked, it was Tyria. Authorities found her first and offered her a deal. If she helped them build the case, she'd walk free. She agreed. What followed was a series of monitored phone calls where Tyria begged Aileen to confess, to do the right thing, to protect her. And Aileen did exactly that. She confessed to every murder, took full responsibility, and shielded Tyria from any legal consequence. In her mind, it was love. Tragic, painful love, but love nonetheless. After that phone call, they never saw each other again. Some saw Aileen's confession as an act of redemption. Others saw it as manipulation. But most heartbreaking was her belief that Tyria might come back. She thought that if she took the fall, her girlfriend would at least stand by her emotionally. But Tyria stayed silent and vanished from the spotlight. To Aileen, it was the ultimate betrayal. The emotional fallout was immediate and visible. After Tyria disappeared from her life, Aileen changed. Her demeanor in interviews shifted from controlled to chaotic. One moment calm, the next explosive. She blamed the system, society, and sometimes even the victims. But under it all, her heartbreak over Tyria lingered like an open wound. And then came the rumors. Some investigators and armchair analysts suggested Tyria knew more than she ever admitted. Was she just a bystander or a silent accomplice? The timeline suggested she was around during most of the killings. She knew the victims' belongings were being brought home. She lived off the money Aileen stole. Yet legally, she was untouched. It leaves an unsettling question. Was this love, loyalty, or cold manipulation? Did Aileen fall on the sword for someone who used her? Or did she willingly protect the only person she'd ever truly loved, no matter the cost? Whatever the truth, the effect was irreversible. With Tyria gone and the confession signed, Aileen's story became courtroom property. Prosecutors didn't just try her, they put her entire existence on trial. And in that courtroom, reality blurred into spectacle. The jury wasn't just watching evidence, they were watching a performance. By the time Aileen Wuornos went to trial, her story was no longer just a legal case. It was a full-blown media circus. Courtroom cameras, daily headlines, tabloids spinning her image into a monster or martyr depending on the day. The public watched not to understand, but to gawk. Her trial became entertainment. The most infamous female serial killer in US history was now primetime drama. But behind the lights and microphones, Aileen was crumbling. Her mental state was visibly deteriorating. She lashed out at reporters, snapped at lawyers, and contradicted herself repeatedly. Her legal defense was thin at best, underprepared and under-resourced. It felt less like a fair trial and more like an inevitable countdown. In 1992, she was sentenced to death. But instead of dragging out her appeals, she shocked everyone. She asked the court to proceed with her execution. She said she wanted to die, that she couldn't take the prison system, that she was tired of being raped by the system. It was like watching someone so deeply broken, they couldn't see life as worth fighting for anymore. Not just emotionally devastated, but spiritually emptied. The girl who'd been discarded by everyone, the woman who'd been demonized by the press, now sat calmly in court and agreed to her own death. And yet, her story wouldn't stay still. At first, she said each murder was self-defense. Clients had tried to assault her. But over time, her versions changed. In later interviews, she claimed some were cold-blooded. Then weeks later, she'd change again. Back to survival. The contradictions made her both less credible and more tragic. The question wasn't just whether she was lying, but why she kept shifting. Was she unstable, manipulative, or just worn down by years of trauma and abandonment? By the end, even those following the case didn't know what to believe. And that became the central dilemma. Was justice truly served? Or was this a woman so damaged, so dehumanized, that her trial became more spectacle than fairness? Was she punished for her crimes, or for being the wrong kind of victim? Her life story was undeniably brutal. But her trial, many argue, never seriously explored that context. It punished the killer, yes, but it never fully confronted the life that created her. So what was the truth? And did anyone actually want to know it, or just watch the show play out? In the hours before her execution, Aileen Wuornos gave one last interview. Unlike the sensational clips that made headlines, the full version rarely aired, and it was far darker than most people ever saw. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't cry. Instead, she spoke in cryptic fragments, twitching, ranting, eyes darting like she was watching something the camera couldn't catch. She claimed she was being surveilled, controlled. That sonic pressure was being used to torture her mind. She talked about the police planting evidence, about being betrayed by everyone she ever trusted. And when asked about death, she didn't flinch. "I'm glad. This is freedom. You're just taking me to a different dimension." To most, it sounded like delusion, classic signs of late-stage psychosis. But it also felt like the conclusion of a life lived entirely outside of peace. No home, no safety, no real love, just survival and punishment over and over again. A life that never let her rest until the system ended it. And then came her final statement, bizarre and unforgettable. "I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all." Her mind had unraveled completely, but the machinery of justice didn't stop. The state pressed forward. She was executed in October 2002 by lethal injection. No delay, no pause. So what was she in the end? Insane, evil, or a human being broken beyond recognition? And perhaps the real question is even harder to ask. If a society creates someone like Aileen Wuornos, how many more are we quietly building right now? Aileen Wuornos is often remembered as America's first female serial killer. But when you step back, another truth becomes painfully clear. She may also have been its most tragic. Her story wasn't just about murder, it was about a life shaped by abandonment, brutality, and a system that never stopped failing her. Yes, the crimes were real. 7 men, each shot with the same .22 caliber pistol. But behind those killings was a woman who had known nothing but trauma. Raped, homeless, exploited. Her pain was never treated. Her illness never acknowledged. The violence she inflicted was horrifying, but it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a world that saw her as disposable from the very beginning. In the end, her final words weren't about justice or even regret. They were scattered, surreal, a strange, haunting message about spaceships and resurrection. But beneath the madness was something raw and undeniable. A human being who had completely unraveled. Aileen Wuornos didn't just snap. She broke, slowly, publicly, tragically. And that's the part we so often miss. The little girl who once tried to trade sex for food at a truck stop eventually became the woman who terrified America. But the road between those two people was paved with suffering no child should endure. So we have to ask ourselves, are we more invested in punishing the monsters or figuring out how they're made in the first place? Aileen Wuornos died by lethal injection in 2002, but her story hasn't faded. It lingers, sharp and unresolved. forcing us to confront questions that go far beyond headlines and courtroom verdicts. If you want more stories that don't just explain what happened, but dig into why, subscribe for our true crime deep dives. We don't just explore the crime, we explore the soul behind it. And now we ask you, was Aileen a monster, a victim, or something in between? Let us know in the comments.